All right. Happy, what day is it? It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday. My days are all over the place. I'm on leave, so I'm a little bit out of context here and that. So happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome back. Another episode of Learning Tech Talks. I'm actually hosting this one live, so this is not a pre-recorded conversation. Gavin and I
Don't swear.
are right. That's right. We are right here. We are taking questions, taking names, all sorts of stuff while we're doing this. And so today we are going to be I'm talking with Gavin Woods. He's from Aurion Learning. I got it right? I did pronounce it right. I did. Sweet. And we're going to be talking about a couple different things. We're going to be talking about the shift to digital learning and some of the things that there's opportunity to do well and better and some of the challenges that we've faced. But we're also going to be talking about a platform called Bytecast, which is actually making it easier for organizations to do this. So it's a bit of challenge and technology all mixed together. But before we get into that, Gavin, we got to get to know each other a little bit more. We know each other a little bit, but the audience may not. So why don't we jump into this? Let's do a little bit of icebreaker, and then I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background. So with this one, why don't we start with this? Where are you in the world today? And your accent maybe gives us a hint, but you haven't said much, so people may not be able to guess.
What accent? I am in Belfast, to be sure, in Ireland.
Okay.
Belfast, Northern Ireland.
Okay. And you've got, I was commenting on this before we went live. He's got like a banner behind him. He is all fancy. I've just got Fred and my United States art behind me. So nothing, I can't compete with you there, Gavin. But I'm in Waukesha, as always, here in my home office. So let's switch over to icebreaker question. You've had a little bit of time to think about this. We're talking digital mobile learning, so it seems appropriate that I would ask this. And anybody who's watching, I love getting suggestions from other people too. So please tell me yours in the comments. But for you, Gavin, what's the newest app? Like, what's the newest app that you've gotten into that you're kind of like, ooh, I downloaded this, I'm kind of hooked on it. What is it for you?
I'm going to give you two, if that's
okay,
one's
that's
very
fair.
practical and one's more aspirational. One would be Masterclass. The learning app where they get, Gordon Ramsay teaches you how to cook, or Bob Iger from Disney teaches you about strategy. So I like that concept of going to well-known experts. I'm interested.
Is it a subscription? Is it like a subscription thing, or how's it work?
It is. So I'm interested in the pricing model, like how much they get paid to be on it. Behind the scenes, they don't share that. So that's one. The other is more practical. There's a local property app called Property Pal, and I was remortgaging my house, redoing the loan, and I checked every day for houses close to me to see what they were valued at. So that became a bit of an obsession over the last couple of weeks.
Okay, all right. So real estate, and now you mentioned Gordon Ramsay as an example. Is that the kind of master classes that you're taking in masterclass? Are you improving your culinary skills?
I'm a big Disney fan. I'm not ashamed to say it. So it was more seeing Bob, I believe it's Bob Iger talking about strategy. Okay. So that was the one that got me into it. But yeah, there's a lot of people in there.
Okay. All right. So for me, I will say, I kind of have two as well. One's not new though. So I've got a real estate app, Realtor and Redfin and Realtor. My wife and I are debating the possibility of moving. And so we're starting to kind of look at houses and where would we move and things like that. So my background at some point, ideally at some point this year, there will be something new going on here, maybe something more exciting like what you have in the background. But for now, you're stuck with this. But the other one that's a new app for me, it's called Wisdom. Okay. The app's called Wisdom. And, are you familiar with Clubhouse?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had seen Clubhouse. I'm on Clubhouse, but I never really got into it like some people did. But I did like the idea of social audio where you can just kind of download your thoughts on things and have a place to store it, and you can share it and whatever. And so I got invited to Wisdom to be one of their kind of like early adopters because it's still in beta. And I really enjoy it. My wife thinks it's nuts. She's like, you go talk to yourself. I'm like, I know, but these things are going through my head. It's just a chance for me to just, yeah, it's perfect. Like now I can speak these things out loud and whatever, maybe go back to it and refer to it or something like that. So anyway, pretty catchy. And again, people can join and things like that. So that's been the one I've been hooked on while I've been on leave, and it'll probably stick long after I'm back. So boss, I see Discord, we got Adobe Animate. So we got a couple apps. And for those watching, if you have some suggestions for cool apps, I would love to hear them because I love downloading things and trying them out. So anyway, let's shift gears, because otherwise we're just going to talk about cool apps, because we have a cool app to talk about. To be fair, we do have a cool app to talk about. But before we get into that, let's little bit of context, a little bit of background into you, Gavin, and your story, your journey, because you're with Aurion Learning, but we're talking about Bytecast. So what's your background?
So my background of about 16, 17 years in educational software. Mostly in a client services sales role. So actually with Aurion 10 years yesterday to the day.
10 years to the day.
To the day.
Wow.
So I've been with Aurion. We specialize, as you can see behind me, in learning that works. So we actually represent a number of different learning platforms. So that's where the link is with Bytecast. It's an exciting new offering. But our background is really working with some pretty big organizations, both sides of the pond, throughout the US, here in the UK and Ireland, further afield. And it's really about trying to understand what their challenges are and really give, consultative advice around the best platforms, content techniques, solutions, models, strategies that are going to deliver learning that works for them.
Okay. Got it. Okay. And so that's the connection. So Aurion's not necessarily, you're not in the software development world. You're not out there doing it, but you encountered Bytecast, and given the fact one of your specialty for organizations is to help them navigate this whole space of, hey, what are we trying to do with learning? So then it works.
Maybe it's the Irish in me who believes in fate, but I was literally sitting thinking about post-pandemic learning and sort of surge in digital that we've seen, and I received a message from Bytecast asking us to take a closer look at it, and quickly went from there to say, look, this is ideal for the challenges that we've actually been thinking about, and I know we'll get more into that. So I think there's a certain credibility comes from not, I'm sort of anti learning management system sort of sales market. There's a certain credibility comes from not having built something and then saying, oh, another learning company with the most exciting platform. Like we hear that all the time. So I think actually finding something and matching that to the problems you're engaging with is somewhat better than answering every question with our new learning platform.
I mean, you can't, and to your point, I get it. To some degree, it can be hard to help it. When you make something, you're very excited about it. I get it. When you build something, you're like, I think it's pretty cool.
Creators bias a little bit.
Yeah, you've got a bit of a creator's bias to it. So I can see what you're saying, but being able to then connect the dots and go, we didn't build it, but we really see some of these dots connecting. So let's talk a little bit about the problem set, because I think that's important anytime we're talking about tech. I actually commented on this the other day with someone that I said, look, if you can't clearly and simply articulate the problem you're solving, go back to the drawing board, because tech for tech isn't doing anything. So let's talk about this, because the need for digital learning is, I don't know, got a jetpack strapped to it over the last 18 months, maybe. So I'm curious, especially from your perspective, being on the consulting side of things, how have you seen the industry kind of shift as we went from, I did a panel yesterday and I talked about this, that the need was already there. I just don't think we saw it quite as much. It wasn't as widely accepted that it was really a need. And then suddenly you had no choice because nobody was local. And it's like, well, what options do you have? But I'm curious what your experience has been working with clients and things like that, making this transition over the last few months.
Yeah, so I think, nobody needs me to tell them that the world is a very different place than it was, 18 months ago. That's my wisdom
They
for
might have
today.
been
But
under a rock for
yeah.
a year and a half. It's possible. Somebody might not have any idea what we're talking about, but I doubt it.
So to think that learning would escape, that change, would be foolish. So, I think immediately when the pandemic hit, as you said, people had no choice. So people did a rapid conversion of content, and we saw that. So we run webinars ourselves, Christopher, and normally we might get 100, 200 people on them. We ran some very simple webinars just with a view of helping people. One was how to convert PowerPoint for online training, and one was how to run an effective webinar. And we had 1,500 separate organizations.
Wow.
Yeah. So that shows you the demand, and it was a very practical sessions. We just thought, let's put any considerations of selling to one side, and let's just try and help people. So I think you saw that rapid conversion. We actually work a lot with the health service, and we had clients who were seeing 1 million e-learning program completions across the year, where maybe it had taken them 5 or 6 years to reach their first million. We saw a need for sort of rapid training and rapid response, and that's the sort of the sort of context I think that we were seeing 18 months ago. And the bit that I'm passionate about is that conversion that we saw. It's not the same as digital transformation of content that is needed for a longer term strategy. So
no, I would agree. I mean, I have to imagine, and you tell me if I'm accurate, because I'm talking to a lot of people and saw a similar type thing where there was almost for a while this urgent, just holy smokes, we got to move on this. We've been talking about doing some of this, and then at the same time, because everything was going that way, the expectation from the end users grew. Because everything was digital before, they might have tolerated it not being a necessarily great experience because they didn't have to do it very much. But suddenly when everything was this way, there was a lot more pressure on practitioners to go, you gotta up your game here now too. So it was both a new skill and an enhancement at skill once people started playing, which would explain the numbers you got on even just some of the fundamentals of things.
Yeah. I wrote a little sort of narrative piece looking at learner happiness, but I looked at learners, L&D managers, and senior leaders, and I think initially, tracking that back, people sort of panicked with a small p. They sort of kept their heads, but they had to convert. The classroom training centers were closed. They had to do something online, and most of the time they went to webinars. So I think we've all been on an awful lot more webinars over the last 18 months, than we had before. And we can get into talking about maybe some of the shortfalls of that, but that was a necessary conversion. So nobody should in any way feel guilty.
No.
It's just the point that if that was survival mode, okay, how can you move towards thriving rather than just surviving?
I think that's and again, you'll get used to this from me. I love jumping in like on things like that, because that I think is a really important point, because there were a lot of organizations that they had dumpster fires burning. I mean, the world flipped and they had to just shift, and that's messy. I mean, that was messy for a lot of organizations, and you do see in the industry sometimes there's a bit of an arrogance that comes along with it. And from my perspective, there's no point in even going there. Everybody was learning a lot of new things and having to experiment with new things, and was in territory they weren't really comfortable with. And so to your point, if it was messy or, that's fine. But what you're getting at is don't stay there, right? Is that fair? Like, just don't stay there. Say, okay, we had to do this, but now how do we keep stepping it forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is some research. For example, there's a nice little infographic from the Fosway Group in the UK that interviewed L&D managers, and they looked at what content types worked really well during the pandemic. So things like video, mobile, curated, blended. They also looked at the fact that 95% of respondents felt that L&D would never be the same again in terms of strategy, resources, and investment, which is probably a good thing. But they also found from their survey group that the better an organization's digital strategy before the pandemic, logically, the better they fared, during the pandemic. So it does bring home the importance for strategy, for investment, and even the most reluctant senior leader for digital is trying to prepare for the next global event that causes something similar. What we've seen. So it's definitely on the radar. And as a learning company, we don't take any joy in seeing people in other sectors who can't perform their roles. But as a digital focused learning company, it's certainly been a very busy 18 months.
Okay. Well, and it's interesting on this one because this point of a lot's changed for us as a function. And I was doing a panel yesterday, and we talked about the fact that for a very long time, people in learning and development talked about, wanting a seat at the table. That's a term that's thrown around. Oh, we want a seat at the table. We want to be part of the conversation, things like that. And for a lot of organizations, whether they liked it or not, they got that seat, that opportunity came up. And the reality is, as you hinted at, it's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. Organizations have realized the sheer need for skill development in their orgs. They've realized that this whole digital approach not only works, but is effective as well. I guess those two are synonymous, but you get the gist. There was kind of this digital's a thing we do when it doesn't work to do what we want to do. Now, this digital first mentality is kind of leading the way moving forward.
So you've got a few things. So thinking about that, the general happiness, like I think senior leaders were really happy a few months in the pandemic with the response of their L&D teams. And I think everybody was happy. We managed to right the ship. We're delivering training. This is great. But we certainly saw anecdotally as the pandemic has sort of dragged on, is still not over, in significant parts of the world. The sort of luster, particularly off, the chalk and talk webinar, it sort of started to wear off for everybody involved. Like trainers weren't happy because they were being asked to deliver in 2 hours what they normally did in 2 days. Learners weren't happy because they'd been on like 20 of them in a month.
20 hours. Well, and as a trainer, it can be fatiguing. Like it takes it out of you. And I think sometimes because it's like, oh, it's just a webinar. I knew some folks who were in the training field that, they wouldn't get a break. They were just back to back to back to back to back to back.
Yeah, it's tough, and I'm not necessarily knocking webinars. I think we all enjoyed the first.
We're doing one. We better not be knocking it.
Exactly, it would be ironic. we all enjoyed, the first 5 Zoom quizzes that we did, during lockdown. But webinars, when you're delivering them as a trainer, they require a certain degree of performance. They certainly require preparation, and they ultimately can feel maybe they lack depth. When you're being asked to do something in 2 hours and you're like, I can't really cover this. Learners aren't necessarily engaged. They're talked at, for 2 hours. So I think there's a real need for us to, one, realize that conversion isn't the same as transformation for the longer term. And that if you're only doing webinars, working in digital learning, as I know you do, like they're just the tip of the iceberg of what can be done. So I think there's certainly a need for us to scale and help people scale, because something has to be able to deliver both volume and quality.
Right. Well, and I think that's just it. So webinar, and I gave some context to this in a talk the other day where I'm like you. I think webinars can be an extremely powerful tool when done right. When done right, but there's also limitations to them. Not everything can be done live, and I think this is where sometimes people go, "Well, great, we can record them." I mean, it can work, but you got to be careful because even some of the interaction then wanes, and so now you go, "Well, so again, is there anything wrong with webinars?" No, but if that's the only tool in your portfolio, are you missing out on opportunity significantly? Because the reality is too, if you don't have other tools, and this is the thing I talk about and get really fired up about, is ideally, you really want to be using those live experiences, whether in person or webinar or wherever, to be doing something, to be engaging in problem solving or collaborating or things like that. Not having one person, just talk and you're sitting there listening. If that's what you're doing, I can consume that via podcast on my workout or when I'm out playing with the kids, whatever that is. You don't need to command my live time if all I need to do is just listen.
Yeah, I think we have this strange thing with webinars that even we didn't have with classroom training. Like if I said I went to a training course, you'd probably ask some questions about what did you do, what was it like? But we tend to just deliver webinars the same way. We tend to deliver them in lecture formats, and even in those early stages of the pandemic, we were encouraging people to think about remote learning activities, self-directed activities, as you say, that sort of flipped virtual classroom where you come together to be more collaborative or solve problems or share. Like you get an awful lot more out of that. Like the only thing about classroom training, the only reason we had 2-day, 5-day courses was because logistically it made more economic and time sensitive.
If you really think about it, it's true. It was because you're saying, hey, we got to get people on a plane flying here, so we have to at least keep them here for enough time to justify the travel, which to me, when I think about the possibilities of hybrid, to me, that's one of the beauties of it is you no longer have to say, let's jam pack all of it into 2 days or whatever, because it justifies the training expense. Instead, we can say, well, who cares if it makes sense to break this thing apart into however many pieces, because that's the right way to do it. We can do it.
Yeah. So I think that's something that's gone, how do we get that scale? I think one of the things is designing specifically for digital, that isn't just that conversion. So designing, your actual webinars as part of a digital blended mix. We used to say about, meeting learner expectations, but I think it's gone a step further. Like these are now learner demands for flexibility. When we think about hybrid working, we're seeing workers actually say, no, I don't want to do that. They're saying, I don't want to come back to the office, 5 days a week. I don't want to go away. I've enjoyed being at home. I have a lockdown dog, who's going to look after the dog, as well as the kids. So, these are now learner demands. So it's a demand for flexibility. There's a demand for a good, positive, practical, skills-based learning experience. Like these are no longer expectations. And I think it's a real area of new and potential competitive advantage. So the organizations who embrace digital better will set themselves apart in their employee experience, in their onboarding, in their general learning and CPD offering. And that's what people are going to actually use in part to choose where they go next in their career.
It's interesting, parallel but similar is one of these things. If we had, getting in front of it, like you said, and using this as a competitive advantage is a huge opportunity for people in the learning space right now. And just as an example, outside of learning, where I was advising somebody on a similar approach with this digital first, and what I'm getting at is this digital first piece you're talking about, which is, hey, let's think about this through digital first. I mean, I guess, if that we're talking, but it sounds simple, but it's not as simple.
Shift. It's a rewire.
It's a massive shift. Yeah, like people say it all the time. They're like, we're going to take a digital first approach. And then you hear what they're doing and you go, I don't think you're thinking about this digital first. And so one area unrelated to learning was medicine. I was working with some physicians and just talking with them about where healthcare was going. And I said, you have an opportunity to get in front of this because you can go to telehealth and be ahead of the curve instead of wait till it comes. And they were struggling with it because they go, no, people want to come to their doctor. They want to see their doctor. And I said, I mean, there's a place for it, but I would say if you pull a majority of people, going to the doctor is not something that's at the top of their want to do list. It's not something they wake up and are excited to go do. If they don't have to, if it makes sense, they'll do it. But are they going, I can't wait to go to the doctor to sit there for an hour just to get my heart checked and then told go home? And so I said, so telehealth's really an opportunity. You can either wait until everybody else is doing it and now you're catching up, or you can be the first to go. And that's really what we're talking about from learning and development. You can wait and kind of hope that things kind of swing back and you can kind of survive, or you can say, no, the world's not going back. We're going to go digital first and really make the plunge and then accelerate things forward.
My learning background was in economics, so you spent a lot of time looking at bell curves and different types of chart, and I think we've seen a massive sort of shift in the bell curve of learning. So a lot more people have been brought in as consumers of digital learning through necessity. And not all of that can possibly find its way onto the radar of even the most efficient and proficient learning and development or digital learning team. So this is a whole level of learning within an organization that doesn't necessarily have to be, mandatory programs, mandatory compliance training for everybody that L&D is historically focused on. There's things at a project level, there's induction and onboarding at a team level. Even in healthcare, there's things like patient education. So we're seeing really broad applications and people really quite hungry for things that feel very achievable, things that lower the threshold of time, effort, and cost involved in responding to learning needs. And that's a little bit of the context as we'll move on to talk about Bytecast. That's the kind of context that Bytecast really fits in terms of being achievable, helping people deliver volume and quality and respond to these learning types that are going to be set up for post-pandemic learning.
Okay, so let's actually start transitioning, because I think we can. I'll be able to pull these together because there's a couple other things I was going to hit on, but I think it'll naturally play itself out when we start talking about this. So let's talk a little bit about Bytecast, because for anybody who might just be joining now and listening in, this isn't, Aurion Learning's not a software company. So, but you're out there helping people learning that works, doing that side of things, advising and consulting with organizations. And you came across this. So I'm actually really curious, because you said once you encountered it, you went, hey, this is something that we should really pair up with. What were some of those gaps that you identified that you said, you know what, why bother going create something on our own, or why do this? I think we found some. What were some of the things that gravitated you towards it?
Sure. So, as a little bit of the background, Aurion as a learning company, we build custom e-learning courses. So we design custom e-learning courses for all sorts of organizations. We're talking hundreds of projects a year, everybody from FTSE 100, Fortune 500 clients to even local charities. So it starts from that, being in the learning tech space all the time, using different offering tools, using and offering different learning management systems. So we offer, we have 170,000 learners on one of our enterprise grade platforms we provide for clients. So we sort of know that space. But we did sort of feel in the post-pandemic world that the threshold of the traditional LMS and potentially designing a module over a series of weeks or months, whether that's an internal team or with an outsourced partner, it took longer to put things together. So webinar was, like, I wouldn't say the only, but almost seemed like the only way for short-term rapid response or more achievable training, and people were gravitating to that.
Okay. No, and so I may kind of unpack this as you're saying, but because I've seen this as an issue for organizations as well, where they needed to move quickly, and the traditional digital learning content, let's say a traditional e-learning, that anybody who's been in the space for very long knows that's not something you stand up overnight. Typically, there's a effort that goes into it. There's review round. I mean, there's a decent amount of stuff. And so for speed, you're saying organizations were saying, well, webinars really is the only thing we can do that stands up fast enough that we can get out and actually deliver. Is that fair?
Yeah, so the speed aspect was certainly something early pandemic, but I think it's a bit broader than that. It's really about achievability. So, time, effort, and resources, and recognizing that organizations actually have a lot of expertise and content internally, that learners are looking externally as well for sources of trusted content. And it's how do you bring all these things together in a way that doesn't have to be solely the domain of a central learning and development team.
Are you suggesting that corporate learning and development doesn't have all of the training content people need for everything?
I would be suggesting that even the most efficient and proficient team could never respond to the full learning picture. So if we believe that there's a whole lot of digital adopters have now come into the audience, they're all individuals. They're all at different points of their career. They're going to want different things. Yeah. So I think certain things rightfully come on priority. Whole organization initiatives, mandatory training, compliance, maybe big HR or talent initiatives. They can be delivered by a central team, but they can't necessarily support Christopher, who's joining my team next month, and I want to put together some resources.
Nobody can support me, just so you know, Gavin. I'm just warning you. Nobody's been able to crack that one yet.
So that's what Bytecast is. So Bytecast goes by the name LXP, and even that term, learning experience platform, is probably still a little bit up for debate depending on whose definition you listen to. But essentially, Bytecast is a learning platform, and then I tend to focus on its strong characteristics to describe it. Okay. So it's focused on bite-sized pathways of learning. So if that e-learning module was like a meal at a restaurant, Bytecast is a bit more like tapas. Small plates, small bite size. So you could watch a video by an expert. You could do a reflective activity. You could maybe do a photo activity where you have to upload photos. You could attend a webinar, but it's part of a bigger pathway of learning. So a bit like the stops on a subway route. Little bite-sized pathways of learning. It's very strongly
I like the
mobile.
Tapas. I like the tapas analogy.
That's my go-to analogy.
It's a good one. Instead of sitting down for some huge steak, potatoes, and this massive meal type thing, it's small little plates that get you where you need to go.
So I actually went for tapas. We had a long-awaited date night in our house. After finally got somebody to babysit. They were able to come across. So the thing about tapas is you actually eat more. I'm not a small guy, but you eat more. You can consume more because it's more manageable. It's more achievable from a learner perspective. So that's one aspect of Bytecast. The other is that it's got a fantastic mobile experience. So I think consumer grade expectations. Learners don't expect, particularly younger learners, don't expect the learning management system to be different from other things that they create. Why would it? I hate the phrase the Netflix of learning, but why would it not provide a consumer grade experience? So with Bytecast, organizations actually get their own branded learning app. So there's a desktop version, there's a progressive web app, and they get their own branded app in each of the iOS and Android app stores.
Okay, so it's a white label. So it's actually white labeled to the organization.
So you're putting learning then directly into the hands of those that need it. And then there's a few things around how it handles content types. So very big on curated. You can pull in streams of podcasts. You can pull in your YouTube channel for public or private. It's really strong.
You can curate in external content as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't have to reinvent everything. So again, lowering the time and lowering the threshold of getting a really well structured, effective pathway of learning out there to people.
Okay. Got it. So the goal of this, and now is there, because this is one of the other things that I'm always curious about from an authoring standpoint. We talked about the fact that one of the challenges sometimes is that the knowledge or the capabilities not necessarily always in the learning and development team's hands. It might be out in the workforce. Now, is there the ability to, and again, we can probably pull it up and just kind of talk through this because I'd love to see kind of more of the detail behind it. But is authoring or content authoring part of that process as well?
Yeah. So, I think the starting point is you acknowledge what an organization may already have. So you can pull in any SCORM or any tin can e-learning module and have that as part of your Bytecast pathway. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Okay, so if you have something, you can use it, but if you're creating new, you don't necessarily have to use what you've always used.
So there is an authoring tool within Bytecast that is specifically designed for producing micro-learning, for producing really mobile-friendly content. So you can produce things that look great, but not everything. You sort of want to say some things can be cheap and cheerful if you want them to be. You know, if you want to put 3 PDFs, record yourself on your phone, record a session like this, put that into your pathway, author some questions to go with it, author a certificate or a reward, maybe for a free coffee for having completed the learning. You can do that, and you could probably get that done in under 45 minutes. So you can be really, really rapid, but you can, put more effort into authoring micro-learning modules or authoring e-learning modules inside or outside Bytecast and put them together. So we've actually ended up having 3 different tiers depending on the preferences and the learning services that an organization might want and help in creating things. So it can be a real flagship initiative, but it also for, I think, particularly smaller organizations, can be a very achievable, quick fire way to effectively structure and deploy content, because you make changes to that content, you press one button, it's deployed to each of the app stores and the desktop version instantly.
Okay. Well, and I think the reason I bring up this concept of user-generated content is, in many ways, and I think this is an area that the tech is starting to mature, but there's still a lot of opportunity for it. So I get a lot of L&D organizations, they have their tool sets. They have their tool sets they're comfortable with, whether or not that's the best fit or whatever, doesn't really matter. It's what they're comfortable with. But I think this becomes a bottleneck for a lot of organizations, because going back to what we talked about before, there might be a need over here and they're coming to the L&D team, hopefully. But then by the time we can get through it and process it and use our tools and all this stuff, that need may have passed. It may be something that's like, well, thanks, but that was something we needed a month ago, and now it's behind us. And this is how you end up with LMSs filled with stuff that isn't relevant. But the problem is, and I've been in some organizations where they've tried to democratize content development with the tool sets that the learning teams use. And it usually does not go very well, because trying to get a random subject matter expert to know how to design in our tools, it just does not work very well. It just does not work very well. And licensing, it's a nightmare, because you got to get them a license to do one thing. It's a bit of a mess, and you end up spending more time trying to do that, versus this is where some think some of these content authoring tools built in the tool can be extremely impactful, because now if Gavin is someone who has something to contribute, they can do it, and they don't need to wait.
Yeah, exactly. I think what we need, if we're going to meet the needs of this greater audience of adopters, we need to spread learning technology expertise more broadly in the organization. And a lot of that can be driven by, telling stories of what's going on. So like Bytecast would allow you to produce your own podcast and to stream it in. So why not have a department or a division in the company talking about what they're up to? Why not just ask an expert to answer 3 key questions? They just send you the video, and that's a stop on the pathway. The bit that often can get in the way of building that more sophisticated e-learning is that you need to be a designer. You need to know about graphic design. You need to know, about how to use the tool, and that is always best done by a smaller amount of people. So this is kind of freeing learning, not just from those who produce it, but also getting organizations to think about how they engage with all their audiences, both internal but also external. And external audiences is a massive part for Bytecast, be that patient education, distributor training, customer success. Like we're seeing people actually engaging with the general public. So when you put your app in the App Store, you can have private content that's only for defined target audiences, but you can have general awareness and public content. that you can make available to
So
anybody?
that's hadn't picked up on that when we had originally started talking about this, because this is actually a really interesting point, and we'll see where this part of the conversation goes. Because if for this now, if you're putting this app in the App Store, to your point, this area, and I've been exploring this with a few organizations recently, this idea of, hey, some of this content that you may be producing internally may have value on your customer side, internal and external. But a lot of times there's not a good way to balance that.
No.
There's really not. And so
Yeah.
organizations either have to manage multiple systems, which causes more problems because now you're creating multiple versions of the content, you're managing it in different ways. And so what you're saying is by doing this, you can actually work on both ends using the same tool.
Yeah. And they don't, there's a subscription element to Bytecast, and the public users don't actually count towards that. So we're actually seeing organizations using Bytecast actually with 3 or 4 different audiences in mind. They're maybe looking at their internal staff training. They're maybe looking at something flagship for onboarding and induction. But they could be looking at patient or customer education. They could be looking at their supply chain. So I have a sales organization that's actually using it to train their distributors in different countries to promote their products, their awareness, so they can go and support customers more effectively. So we're seeing a real breadth to the use cases, but we're also seeing engagements with people who wouldn't count themselves as traditional L&D people. We're seeing a lot of interest from L&D teams, but we're seeing people in talent, we're seeing people in employee experience, we're seeing people who are more project oriented in their roles, maybe engaging with small businesses in government, or they're engaging with customers. So it's really freeing. I think some of the learning technologies, for outside of the traditional confines of being, an internal L&D HR led initiative.
It makes sense though, because this is a opportunity area in organizations. And I've seen this time and time again, and this just goes back to some of the limiting tool sets that organizations have, because other parts of the business, when you start talking about change management, digital transformation, you start talking about some of these things, everybody in the company is working on this stuff. It's not just L&D. It's not just one. Everybody's doing something with this, but in many regards, I think sometimes we forget as L&D practitioners that they don't have familiarity with or access to a very diverse set of tools to do much with. Yeah. So when they're planning on doing something, either one, they come to L&D and ask us to do it, which a lot of times we don't have capacity. It's like, well, it's not one of our priorities or whatever. And so then they're left with, well, so now what are we supposed to do? And then they go to the problem we talked about earlier, which is, well, I guess we'll just do a webinar, or I guess we'll just send out a PowerPoint because that's really the only thing we have in our tool set. And what we're saying is it doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, L&D teams work really hard. Spend a lot of contacts, a lot of friends. We spend our time working with that part of the business. But we have seen a shift over the last couple of years to working more widely across organizations. And I think if somebody comes passionate about learning with a learning need, it's really heartbreaking a little bit that they would be turned away. So I think trying to find new technologies and tools that harness that enthusiasm, maybe channel it and structure it, because we want to provide effective learning that works ultimately.
We don't want it to go too far off the rails, which is
we don't want to go off the rails.
Sometimes.
But I use the analogy: if you can teach somebody to catch fish, they can feed their family for a lifetime. So why not equip a manager, equip a project owner, equip a head of customer success or patient education with the tools that they need to deliver something that's achievable. But Bytecast also, I think, elevates a little bit because it provides this fantastic sort of bucket to put your content in, and a good experience, and it tracks and it reports, and it gives you both traditional LMS analytics, but also engagement analytics. You get a lot of insight into how maybe customers are engaging with your content, the profiles of them, things like that.
Well, which again, and if you're game, we might be able to pull it up so we're talking about it a lot. But one of the things that you bring up with this, that again, I think as you start thinking longer term with some of the stuff you're trying to achieve, we in the field often struggle with the rest of the organization not understanding what we deal with, what we go through, but also some of the realities that, hey, a lot of stuff gets created that end users don't necessarily find value in. And we're explaining it from our perspective because we have that visibility. But I think what you're talking about is democratizing some of that, which can actually help the organization be better as a learning organization. Because if you can get your project leaders or your people leaders or whatever to start going, I have this great idea for learning and I think it's going to change the world. And they make it and then they realize, oh, I guess maybe it wasn't really that impactful or people weren't getting any value. It's going to help people think twice. So it's not only about getting more people to learn, but also teaching people to be better leaders of learning, because that's really what we need as an organization. Is we can't have everybody relying on learning and development. We need to actually be making learning professionals everywhere.
Yeah, so that, we're passionate about the concept of learning spaces. We've used, some of our custom learning portal projects for clients. So I think getting more people involved as champions of learning within an organization. So like a big part of Bytecast is about learning comms. So you have your pathways of learning. They're more you're structured, but you also have a discover section, and there's where you can access both either internally created podcasts and streams, either audio or video, but also externally curated. You can also bring external websites into your pathway as well. So there's a big part, and I think an exciting role, say for a division leader, to outline, from a learning comms perspective, what are the lessons we really need to learn for the next quarter? What stories can we share? And each department having their own podcast that streams through that people can subscribe to, or centered around initiatives like well-being or safety, whatever those are. So it's not just an e-learning course anymore.
No, it's not. And this is, again, going back to this is us trying to help the organization learn how to fish. And I think sometimes there's this territorial nature where we're afraid of, well, what happens if they figure out how to do it for themselves, or what they're not going to do it right, or will they still need us? And to me, I say, I've never been in an organization where we've gotten really good at teaching people how to fish, where we still aren't adding tremendous value, because it allows us to almost be the center of excellence for everybody, and it scales.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as a company, we're for some organizations gives them other options, but it in no way marks the death knell of corporate and workplace e-learning creation, because we're sort of betting on that as a company ourselves. That's a big area.
You got some skin in the game there.
We just know with this increasing audience that not everything gets onto the radar of the central L&D team, and not everything reaches that threshold, be that for time reasons, be that for resources, be that for other, equally valid strategic priorities. So, Bytecast fits into that either as a replacement for a traditional LMS or as part of the ecosystem that is just bringing other content types, is bringing that scale and volume and quality, but it's giving other possibilities to sort of meet that surge in demand.
Okay. So let's do this as we finish this up, or as we come into the final stretch. Why don't we pull it into the feed and just kind of walk me through what we're looking at, so people can kind of see.
Yeah. So this is literally off my
and things like that.
This is off my own phone. So we're going into an Aurion branded app. So this would be an Aurion branded app. You come into your dashboards, kind of uses the Apple Rings concept. It shows you your progress. If your latest pathway, you can be on more than one pathway at once. The actual pathway itself is kind of the stops on the subway. This is just a little milestone introduction. But you'll see as we go back to the pathway, that you can only access certain rows as you progress through activities. So they can be optional or required. This is, for example, an article that was built within Bytecast, similar to one we have on our website. We have a podcast here that we
Welcome to the Learning the Works podcast.
A little bit tongue in cheek. And we have a little Bytecast video. So that could be an expert interview. You've turned the sound off there, that's great. So you're pulling things together quite easily, and that then unlocks the next row. So as we see down below, the rows are grayed out.
And so I'm going to back up 1 second on here real quick. Let me see if I can do this without messing it up. We'll see now. Okay. So this almost little roadmap grid that you're creating here, this is actually part of then the architecture design for as you're designing the experience journey, correct? You're actually kind of mapping this out and saying, okay, if I were to get somebody from point A to point B, I think it looks like this, kind of like an actual map versus just a list of things of saying, hey, you might go here, you might go here, you might go here, and you can choose what is kind of a, you need to go here versus, hey, you have the choice, here's something that you may find relevant.
So you'll see there that first activity we've done is contributing to the little padlock beneath to unlock the next level. Now activities can be optional or required, but you can change the order of those vertically and horizontally. So it can be as easy as uploading a PDF, creating the activity. It'll take you about 45 seconds to add an activity to your pathway. So you can have pit stops that are e-learning modules where you get a little bit deeper into a topic. That's just a little podcast we put together. We're actually streaming it in from Apple Podcasts. You have a video that we've uploaded, so that could be an expert interview. So it's all about the application of these tools and content types to your particular topic areas. Could be an expert interview, could be a story, customer story. We have a little audio check-in coming up just from one of my colleagues. You could encourage learners, or you could ask them questions then about that audio. It could be a scenario. This is a video. I think we recorded this on our phone last week at an event. Just me and my little handheld mic recorded on my phone. So what you're seeing here isn't produced in any way. It's literally a screen mirror from this phone here across. Now, this is one of the little e-learning modules, the little micro-learning nuggets that Bytecast calls stories.
These are all little things, elements that you could be creating from whatever you have, and then you're building them into a pathway.
Could be existing, use it as is, could maybe needs a little bit of tidy up. This is a little bit of me explaining what a story is. So if you want to delve a bit deeper, you can get into your SCORM e-learning modules. This is the Bytecast little authoring tool. You'll see I'll just flip up. It goes through different types of interactions. You have quizzes in there. There's card games. There's text and image slides.
So there's a number
all
of
sorts of different things.
Pre-built elements that people can choose from to be able to say, okay, I'm creating a pathway. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean a learning and development person. This could be a subject matter expert that says,
this was deliberately designed by me for today. I don't claim to be a designer. I'm fairly tech savvy, but anybody who has any familiarity with tech can put a pathway together in Bytecast. It is not the preserve solely of a designer. Now, there's some bits that you can enhance. Maybe get a designer to help you. Get a nicer version of your diagram or something like that put in. So that's a little sorting quiz. So
but
they're all there with templates.
I'm just thinking, even in terms of, and I'm pausing it here. I'm gonna jump back and maybe we'll bounce back to it here in a second. This could be something that, because I saw, you can embed audio or you could embed video type of a thing. So if a subject matter expert wanted to create a little micro pathway for something, they could take their phone and maybe just record themselves sharing something. They pop it in a pathway, and then maybe they put a document that has some relevant support, and then that's it. Yeah, and it's like, there we go. And now that that's taken care of.
As a company who spends a lot of time, working with organizations on design, that's where I think the freedom, there will still be flagship projects where somebody wants to, put more time, effort, design expertise into designing content. But some topics, it's perfectly acceptable. As you said, record yourself on a video, create some questions, use those 2 PDFs that you have, pull in that podcast from the recognized industry expert. Maybe say you want people to watch minute 1 to minute 2. You can do all that in Bytecast. It's very, very achievable, and you can deploy it instantly to learners. So the deployment of being able to roll it out to your own app, learners can get notified. They can subscribe to particular streams, when there's new episodes, like they can on YouTube. So it's a really great way to sort of get more learning done, but also quality learning. It provides that structure that consideration, what you should include around learning outcomes or descriptions and things like that.
So I'm going to jump to two questions that I hope we can answer before we're done here because they came in. So I want to make sure I pull these up. So boss, let's tackle this one first. So in terms of kind of the user experience, let's talk user experience with Bytecast. In terms of actual execution, in terms of how it's being used, are people that are using it, is this something that they're using as kind of their dedicated learning app? So would the goal be, because I can see in your methodology, you may change the way you approach this depending on how you're going to do this. And to Boss's question, it's, is this something that they're already on their mobile device, or would this be separate? So would they be taking a break from their work to do this? And to me, I've got a perspective, because if you were to do that, you would just take a different approach. So I'm curious how people are using it.
Well, I think either or. You have a progressive web app, so you can use it on your desktop, and the experience is similar to what we've shown on the phone. We focused on the phone just because the mobile experience is great. So there is a desktop version. You can access in a browser. You can access a progressive web app. So you could access it in the way you do perhaps a more traditional LMS. But we are seeing that learners are actually learning at all sorts of different times. Part of that is on the job, and maybe even having a how-to piece of content beside you while you do something else on the computer. Others are saying, okay, I really want to do that training, but I want to take ownership of myself. It's not just because the company told me I have to do it by Thursday. It's because I want to do it. I want to develop new skills, and we're seeing a big surge in talk about skills and skills development. So people are doing that on all sorts of different devices. So I think it's just about meeting that. It's really about flexibility. It's not necessarily one diktat, but I think Bytecast does have a particularly good mobile learning experience. So if you did have an external audience, for example, that you knew was predominantly on mobile devices, or you couldn't assume had desktops or laptops, it could be ideal for that. But equally, if you had internal staff training and they're using laptops, well, they could use it on that as well. It's about flexibility rather than necessarily a mandate.
Well, and I think the way I think about it when I think about some of these things is, and it'll actually tie to the next question. So we'll see how I thread the two together. But it's really being intentional as the person in charge of architecting this in terms of how are you thinking about it being used? Because I look at it, I've seen implementations of technology like this that doesn't have this user-generated component. And it doesn't necessarily work very well because you're asking it to become the place people to go to learn and to figure things out. Yet it ignores the fact that a lot of that learning isn't within your control. And so then you're going, well, come here for everything. And people go there and they realize, well, but not everything's there. Or if I see a gap, I can't contribute to it. So how can you really say this is the place for learning? And so I think it's one of those things. There's some definition that you have to do first to be able to say, here's how it should be used.
Yeah, I think part of it is what is an organization's starting point. So, for example, some people will have a well-established enterprise-grade LMS. Now, there's stats floating around to say that most of them aren't actually happy with that LMS, but they can't get rid of it because it's sort of sticky in their organization. So
they might have some regulatory requirements holding them to it, something like that.
So there is an option with Bytecast through webhooks to write back to a central learning platform. So it can sort of deliver some of the things that maybe your traditional LMS isn't delivering for you. But I think in a lot of organizations, we will see people sort of reimagining their learning and using something like Bytecast instead of the traditional LMS. In others, particularly bigger organizations, there might be, it becomes part of that ecosystem. But I think getting people learning in any sense is part of the ingredient needed to have a learning culture. So I think if you can give them things outside of your organization that they can access, they don't necessarily have to be censored or pre-approved by you. They're there, take of it as you will, TED Talks, Tony Robbins, if that's your thing, but whatever it is, allow people to explore what's interesting for them.
Yeah. Well, and so on that one, and then this will kind of be the final question from Sujoy here, is methodology or technology, what comes first? It's kind of like, I feel like the chicken or the egg question. So, but on this one, and the reason I say this ties back is I do think that there is some of this, and I talk about this a lot with tech, which is you really have to kind of think about what are we trying to accomplish here, or how are we trying to accomplish? because that's going to then help you map back to the capabilities that you need and also make some of those decisions. So even to the example you used, Gavin, of, so do we need our LMS and this, or would we replace our LMS with this? Well, that's going to depend on what your methodology or your strategy is for learning. Are we going to allow user-generated content to go in without approval? Are we not? So I think there really is value in establishing what those guardrails are and what your methodology is while remaining flexible, because I have seen it go too far where organizations get lockstep and this is how it's going to be. And they aren't paying attention to what the needs of the organization actually are. And suddenly they're limiting themselves by doing that.
Yeah, like I think my passionate position would be technology is an enabler to learning.
Yeah.
So I always say to people, don't talk about technology with me. We obviously give advice to people. We know about the technology. Tell me about your problem. Tell me about your challenge. Tell me about how that's impacting your business. So that's what's been really almost interesting and really exciting about Bytecast. The conversations we're having like that are so vastly different, and yet there's commonality in some of the things that Bytecast can do. But if you take two, patient education, for example, big pressure to manage people to manage their own conditions, to be aware, for carers to be aware, perhaps something like epilepsy with an organization we're working with, to be aware about how to spot seizure signs, things like that. General awareness content for the general public on what do you do if somebody has a stroke, for example. There's things that you can do there. Whereas you switch across to customer success, that could be very much focused on lowering tech support calls by explaining better how to use a product. So the technology is the enabler. So I don't think you should ever sort of pick a technology solution and then try and work a strategy
and then back
around
into
it.
What are we trying to do?
You'll be out of date. Good effective learning never goes out of fashion.
I agree. And I think that's, we started this conversation with that, was focus on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to solve and how, and then back into the technology. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to be rigid or inflexible along the way. So, okay. Well, this was super fun, Gavin. I appreciate you making the time this morning. And again, hopefully folks, you got a chance to see kind of this different approach to learning content design and delivery in Bytecast, and just some of the things to think about as you tread into this, because the world's not going back. And so this whole digital first approach is something that everyone's going to have to adopt. They're going to have to adopt their own flavor. But I think figuring that out is at the top of mind for learning professionals. I can tell you it's at the top of mind for a lot more than just learning professionals, though business, HR professionals are trying to solve this same problem. And so we have an opportunity to get in front of it and set the strategy.
Yeah. So this is part, thanks for your time today, Christopher. This is part of Bytecast Week. So we have a whole series of events. So we are doing more deep dive demos later this week. So anybody who wants to reach out to yourself or myself on LinkedIn, we're more than happy to put them in touch with the schedule of events that's happening this week.
Awesome. So Bytecast Week, this is just one of many events.
Just one of many events. So we'll send you your T-shirt in the post.
You know what? Go for it. I love swag, so send it my way. All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks so much, Gavin, for being here. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And on speaking of different learning mediums, Friday, I'm talking, I won't be talking live. I'll be streaming. It's my last pre-recorded stream, but we're talking about podcasts, which is one of the topics we talked about in here. And how can you include podcasts as this different style of content to actually do this? And so now these
underused, I'd say underused.
I 100% agree. I've been using enterprise podcasts for a while and am surprised how little utilization they get. So it'll be a good conversation.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thank you, Gavin. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I almost said weekend, but it's Tuesday. It's too early to wish everybody a good weekend.
Good mindset to have. Good positive mindset.
There you go. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.